This is The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Over our 12-episode season, I will share some of my best sweater knitting techniques with you while we knit a sweater together. Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 8. This may be my favorite episode to do because one of my favorite parts of knitting a sweater is actually putting everything together, taking two-dimensional pieces of fabric and turning them into a three-dimensional shape that fits our shoulders, keeps it nicely on the upper body, and really makes it a sweater. Before that, it's just like scraps of fabric. So I have my pattern with a few little extra notes just to remind me. And the thing to really remember today is to do the V-neck decreases at the beginning and the end of this whole experience. So I've gotten myself kind of set up here. I have, as you saw, the body is all on one needle and my underarm stitches are being held. So that I didn't have to put them away, I put my stitch markers in the stitches that, yes, I've put my stitch markers in the stitches so they're in the right position. And what I've done, because I'm using using interchangeable needles, I have put a stopper on the end of both pieces, and I've used one needle on one cord and the other needle on the other cord. So I don't have to worry about having two needles. I don't have to worry about which one had the small, sometimes you use a smaller needle to hold things. So anyway, let's get sorted out here. Did I do this right? Okay, so what I realized, I got everything set up, but I was kind of wrong because I need to have the needles on the body for now, but I can switch them back and forth as we go along. So let's put the stopper back on the sleeves until we're ready to add the sleeves in. Okay. And now we will be able to work the body over to where we're going to join in the sleeve, and then we'll have to switch back. So this will be a little fiddly, but totally worth it and a little bit easier to do than having multiple needles. If you have multiple needles, obviously you don't have to worry about this part. So as usual, and remember, we're done with our buttonholes, so don't make any more buttonholes. Slip one, and remember, I've still got my yarn all attached, which is handy. Knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now we're going to do our next V-neck decrease. Slip, slip, knit, and we're going to knit our way over to where the underarm stitches are held. Once again, the sweater is telling us exactly what it needs us to do. And we're almost there. I'm trying to knit fast for you because I want to join the sleeves and start working the shaping. And the nice thing about the raglan shaping is that it's pretty straightforward. Like, you don't need to hold on to the pattern the way you do with some other more complicated yoke shapings, because basically on a raglan you do decreases every right side row. Now sometimes you might have a raglan that is like a compound raglan where you do alter how often you do the shaping, but this is just a straightforward raglan. All right, almost there. 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm now at the point where I am going to fiddle around with my needles. So I'm going to shift the needle, the left needle, to my needle that is holding my sleeves, and put the stopper on the other one, because we don't want to lose any stitches. This is not the time to lose stitches. So be a little cautious. It takes a little longer, but all of this work, all of this fiddling will pay off, because after this you can just go. So I have 8 stitches here that are being held out of my 16, And that's, so the underarm stitches, you've got half at the beginning and half at the end so that they end up in the middle underneath in your underarm. And now I've put my marker into the first underarm stitch, which is actually I should shift it over to the body stitch next to it. And we'll decrease around this stitch as we go along. So, oops, almost snagged the yarn. Okay, so I've got my marker in. And I'm ready to just knit these stitches from, what's going on here? These are tangled. Yes, one stitch went over the other. Okay, but now we're ready. Try not to pull too tightly, but don't leave a big gap because you're bringing two different pieces of fabric together. And here we go. We're doing the sleeve. See how this wants to sort of pull and be a little heavier, so we just want to be careful with that. We don't want the stitches to be too bunchy, but we don't want them to be too loose. The good thing though is if they are a little loose when we, well, you won't see them eventually because they'll be under your underarm. And we can sort of nudge them a little when we weave together the underarm seams and kind of tidy them up and tighten them up. Because the thing is we have the weight of the entire body of the sweater here, and it's trying to pull away from the sleeve just because we're on the first row. After this first row, everything's good. Everything is safe. Every row you add brings all of the fabric together from the three different pieces into one coherent piece. It's magical. So with the raglan decreases, we're going to be doing my favorite, that center double decrease again. And that will make a really delicate raglan line. Sometimes you'll see raglans and they'll have you do, slip, slip, knit, knit one, knit two together. And that makes for a 3-stitch wide decrease. And that's fine. It obviously depends on the design. But here in this instance, we're doing a fingering weight sweater. It's fitted, it's light, we want that sort of delicate line there. And so the stitch that we put the marker in, the last body stitch, will be the center stitch when we are decreasing. And so we'll work to one stitch before that marked stitch and then do our center double decrease. And if it makes you feel more secure, you can move the marker up every time you do that. Otherwise, as you go along, you'll start to notice those stitches lining up, and you almost don't need the marker because if you're watching your knitting, it will tell you exactly where you need to do your decrease. All right, so I'm almost at the end of my sleeve one, and and of course I'm not at the end of all of the stitches on sleeve one because I have and I just did it. The stitches for the underarm were still on the sleeve. So I'm gonna have to back up one and now make sure that I've got my secured stitches there on the waste yarn, and I just slide them off, and they will hang out for quite a while until not quite a while, but long enough until we're ready to weave the underarms together. And now I need to switch out my needles. Let's see, I want to make sure that my right needle stays as it should, and I switch the stopper and the needle back, and we'll let the sleeve hang out over on the held stitches situation. There we go. And as we knit across the back. But I still, even though there aren't nearly as many stitches, I'm still going to put the holder on and keep this sleeve safe until we're ready for it. So now it's just a matter again of moving my little marker. I had it in the last stitch of the sleeve, and now it goes in the first stitch of the back because it's right there where the fronts and back of the body meet the sleeve. That's going to be our raglan stitch. And again, you want to make sure that you pull the stitch snug so that you're getting the stitches to line up in a row, but don't pull really tight. You don't want to break the yarn or anything, but you don't want a big gap. And so now we've got the beginning of the body back. The way we're going to turn these two-dimensional flat bits of knitted fabric into a three-dimensional object is through these raglan decreases. And the raglan lines, we're decreasing in front and back, and they narrow both the sleeve and the body. And so it brings everything together. It's got that sort of, the shape of like a baseball tee. That's the raglan line. And as the fabric gets smaller, of course, it comes up. We're moving up, and we're also moving in. And we'll get to the point where there are only a few stitches left at the top of the sleeve, and just the right number of stitches across the back. And pretty much no stitches at the fronts, because we've been doing the raglan decreases and the V-neck decreases. But be sure to pay attention in the pattern to when you should stop your V-neck decreases, because we don't go all the way, or we'd end up with a very wide V-neck that would not really work out too well for the fit we're looking for. So once you finish the V-neck decreases, you just continue to do your, it's not really a button band anymore, it's really the collar now, and it's morphed directly from being your button band up into the collar. And we'll do a little more work here at the very top to sort of angle that, the collar area in so it doesn't make these little ears. And basically all you need to do is, once you've got everything joined together, you work your decreases every right side row. On the way back, you just do your initial bands and then purl away. There's nothing, nothing extraordinary that you need to do there. And we'll work our way up to the collar, the very end of the collar, and then it'll be time, oh my goodness, before you know it, it will be time to bind off, to weave together your underarms and sew up your seams, and they're very small seams on the sleeves, and then do your buttons. And of course, last week we talked about our different button options and whether we're going to sew on our buttons or shank them together and make, you know, changeable buttons. So I'm looking forward to those things next week when we'll do the finishing work. And I'll also talk a little bit about sewing in ends. And I'm going to say right here that I think there are a number of different ways to weave in ends, and so I'll just show you my way. If you do it differently, you don't have to do it my way, but if you're interested, you can try a new to you option. And that's, again, I've said it before, I'll say it again, the great thing about knitting is there are lots of different ways to solve the issue at hand. All right, so I'm almost ready to do my second sleeve, and I'm so excited because this is the fun part of the knitting, is the yoke, and I couldn't wait to get to this part. Once again, I'm going to move my marker over. I probably could have just, if I'd thought about it, I would have just put them in the right spot in the first place, but I just wanted them, I didn't want to put them back in their box. So now got my last back marker, my second back marker. And I'm going to need to do that little switcheroo again to get my sleeve in position. Let's see. I'm going to make sure we're starting from the right side. That's another thing. Make sure you have everything set up for your right side rows. So you don't want to, you know, add the sleeve on backwards. It would still work, but you'd suddenly have purl fabric. And that actually could be another cool way to do it, to have purl fabric on the sleeves instead of knit, but that's not the design today. So feel free to try that out yourself at some other time. So I have to remember to take my, shift this along and get the first 8 stitches off the needle. They've already been set on waste yarn. And so I'm just going to pop those off so that I'm ready to start with stitch number 9. Ooh, and see, again, we've got all this fabric, it all slipped all the way down. So I'm going to try and hold a bunch of the fabric up so that we don't end up with a big gap between the body and the sleeve. And we don't have to do any decreasing, we don't have to think about anything except knitting our stitches, of course, until we get to the second V-neck decrease at the end here. But I'm just saying, as you're working across, this isn't something where you have to be paying a whole lot of attention to the number of stitches you've got, as long as you set it up with the right number of stitches. You know, the stitches held for your underarms and the stitches for the sleeves, and putting everything together. It is getting to be a heavy bit here. I usually, of course, knit sitting down rather than standing up, and so everything would be in my lap. Now, if you don't have interchangeable needles like I'm using, you certainly could put the sleeves on just a smaller needle. Don't ever use a larger needle, but if you use a smaller needle and that's the needle you're knitting from, it's okay if it's not the same size as the needle you're knitting to. So the real issue when you are making stitches is your right needle, then assuming that you're knitting sort of standard direction. That's the needle that's making the new stitches, and you want to make sure it is the correct size. But you can use a smaller needle, or you can take a little time and slip all the stitches onto the needle in position, like if you've got everything on waste yarn. And then all you have to do is work your way along the needle and knit everything together. And that would be a pretty tidy way to do it too. But since I had the interchangeable cables, it was just easier for me to do it this way. And that way I didn't have to worry about slipping everything to waste yarn, which just made it easier for me. All right, almost done with sleeve 2. Then we'll be back on one whole needle. One needle only. And what's the one other thing I have to do here? Well, first of all, I have to switch back. Finally, I'm done with my stoppers. They can go to the bottom of my knitting bag until the next time I need them. Goodbye. And the needle too, for that matter. And now we're back on one needle, and I just need to do the second front to the left, and everything will be ready for the race to the top. Maybe that's what we'll call it. Okay, and put my last marker in there. And we're almost done, but we do have to remember to do our second V-neck decrease of the row, because we're not quite done with our V-neck decreases. We're getting there. All these threads, I'm getting tangled. Okay, here we go. Get everything together. Get to the end, and then on the way back, like I said, it's just a very plain, it's a plain row. It's a work even row. You don't have to count. You could count up all your stitches and make sure that you have the same number of stitches as I told you should have in the joining row. Because that's a great thing to do if you are worried about stitch counts. It's always great to check on the way back that you have the right number, and that's something that I do quite often, and especially if I'm doing like a lace shawl that has a wrong side row where you just purl back. I like to double check and count up my stitches and make sure that I'm doing it right, because I'd rather find out on that row than after doing another lace row, which of course we're not doing lace here. And now it's ready for me to do 2 stitches before my lovely marker. Knit 2 together here so that they lean the proper way. And now slip the marker and knit to the end. And I will hold it up and show you guys because I'm so excited. Here we go. Oh. All right. Last stitch. Everything, whoop, got my tails tangled. Sorry. Everything is together. Oof. Here, let me flip out that sleeve. There you have it. Yay, a little sweater. Just, oh, so close, so close. I can't wait to finish this up. And again, oh, the fabric on this yarn, the resulting fabric from this yarn is just lovely. So I hope you have chosen a yarn that makes you really happy, because you're gonna be really happy with your sweater. I know I'm already happy with mine. So I think that's everything today. As I said earlier, next week, we're gonna be talking about finishing, binding off, getting to the point where we're getting close to being able to wear our sweaters. So until then, thank you so much for joining me. Remember, if you are on social media, to share your project. Solstice Cardi or the KD Sweater hashtag. They're both great. Check them out on Instagram and Twitter. And until next time, thank you so much for being here and joining me in this adventure. Have a great time and happy knitting. Bye. This is season 1 of The Sweater, and we are knitting the Solstice Cardi together. Many thanks to Karen at Roundtable Yarns, Natalie at Remembrances Pottery, Corinna at Picnic Knits, Tara Swiger and my fellow Starship captains, and you for being part of this knitting adventure. Don't forget to visit KathleenDames.com/thesweater to sign up for the newsletter before March 25th and get your free copy of the Solstice Cardi pattern in the welcome email. Is it after March 25th? Purchase your copy of the Solstice Cardi from my Ravelry shop. And be sure to share your project on social media using the hashtags KDSweater and Solstice Cardi. Questions? Comments? Just want to share your progress? Visit the Kathleen Dames Design Ravelry forum for support and camaraderie. Thanks so much for joining me, and happy knitting!